Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I've been really enjoying all your versions of the DNF Tag, a really great tag created by Nelle and Scott over on the channel Gunpowder, Fiction, and Plot. DNF, of course, means did not finish, and it's what we do when we abandon a book in some way. Both Steve Donoghue and Roz from Scallydandling About the Books were kind enough to tag me, and I thought I would answer the prompts today in honor of Tag Tuesday. So let's get started. Many of my answers may echo some of what the rest of you have said in your versions of this tag. The first prompt is, do you DNF books? Yes, but not very often. My answer partly depends on what exactly we mean by DNF, something that comes up in a future question, so I'll hold off on that discussion for a minute. Interestingly, when Roz tagged me, she said she suspected I was not a person who commonly DNFs books, and she's absolutely right. But I guess there's one category of books I very frequently put down: library books. Things have changed a bit in the last several months while my library has been in lockdown, and now that it's just opened for curbside pickup of wholes. But for years, I've checked out a large number of wide-ranging books, really not intending to read all of them fully. Occasionally I pick out something I can't wait to read in its entirety, but often I check out books, especially nonfiction books, that I just want to page through briefly. At other times, I want to try out a chapter or two before I decide if I really want to commit to the whole book. Honestly, I usually don't even consider books in this library catalog to be DNFs, since I never really committed to reading them. And it isn't like I really started something for real and then put it down. On the other hand, the number of times I have actually DNF'd a book that started with the intention of reading all the way through is significantly smaller. Prompt number 2. If you DNF a book, does it count towards books read for the month? I really don't keep track of the number of books I read per month, but if I did, I can't imagine giving myself credit for something I had explicitly chosen not to read. On the other hand, I would like to be better at keeping a list of not how much but what I read and how I feel about it. That would mean keeping a list of books I started and abandoned, just for my own records. I do have a Goodreads account, and I often look to see what people I admire feel about books I'm considering reading. But I've been terrible at keeping it updated. Perhaps committing to Goodreads should be one of my 2021 goals. Next question. Is there a difference between DNFing a book and just putting it down for a bit? Absolutely. If I'm not appreciating a book at all, and I can't imagine ever appreciating that book, I would call it a true DNF. Right at the moment, I can only think of one book I've started with the full intention of reading it all the way through, but then abandoned because I absolutely couldn't stand it, the writing style and the plot and the characters, and that was 25 years ago. Incidentally, I've gotten so much pleasure for the story of DNFing it that I now have almost a fond memory of that book. It is much more common for me to put down a book so early in the process that the book doesn't even make it to the stage of actually becoming a book I'm reading, when I'm really just browsing in the comfort of my own library bag. As many of you said, there are also a lot of books that I think are intended to be read in bits and pieces. A lot of nonfiction, like wide-ranging histories that are talking about a variety of periods when I only want to read about one of those periods. Or a lit critic talking about a lot of novels or authors when I only want to read about one or two. Poetry, perhaps, collections of short stories, essays, or whatever. I don't even think I'm putting those books down unfinished, as long as I've read what I went into the book thinking I would read. Usually when I stop reading a book, it's because I feel like I'm not in the right place, emotionally or intellectually, to read the book, either because of a particular mood I'm in or because I realize the book might work better for me after I know more about a subject, or when I'm more mature, or whatever. When I was young, my mother shared with me that when she was young, she had hated Flaubert's Madame Bovary enough to DNF it. I'm sure she did not use the abbreviation DNF, but I think she had some casual phrase, maybe threw it against the wall. I might be messing up all the details here, but the way I remember it is that she resisted mightily many years later when her book club chose to read the book. But because she loved her book group, she did read Madame Bovary. It might have been that trying a different translation did the trick. Or it might have been the fact that she was older and understood more about long relationships and the meaning of marriage and the experiences of adult womanhood by then. Whatever it was, she loved the book that second time. My mother shared her advice with me, telling me to postpone reading Flaubert's book, advice which part of the high school me found irritating. Did she not think I was mature enough? But oh my goodness, when I did read it many years later, when I was an adult woman and read the beautiful Lydia Davis translation, I adored Madame Bovary and found it really fascinating. My mother might have saved me from having to DNF it back when I was 17. I admit that there are plenty of times when I stop reading a book for the wrong time reason and then never seem to get back to it. But even if I haven't picked it up again yet, that doesn't mean I've committed not to pick it up again. One example, just like Raza's example, is James Joyce's Ulysses. My spouse David and I started reading it aloud to each other while we were in Ireland a few years ago. A reading experience that we mentioned before, maybe in the Books with Friends tag, an experience we both really loved. When we got back home to the States, and back to our lives full of all sorts of random things which keep us busy, we put the book down. And we still haven't finished it. Our copies, along with several supporting books, are lined up where we can see them from our regular evening perches on the sofa in the living room, and we still haven't recommitted. Perhaps we can find a way to return to Joyce this fall when we have longer blocks of time to read together. Maybe over Thanksgiving or December. One more DNF-ish-like category. I really loved Jason's discussion over on Byways and Bookland of another category of books that haven't been finished. Books we have read all the way through, but which we know we still want to come back to for more readings. Books we suspect we will never be finished with, even. I know I've read Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice a zillion times each. I would never have thought to call books on my frequent reread shelves DNFs, but Jason's absolutely right that there are books we read and reread, books that are part of our lives and that we're not likely ever to be finished with. There are books that I wouldn't swear would always be on my will never be finished with list, but which I need with me a bit longer, for another read or two at least. I think I'd put Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury in that category. A book I've only read a few times and just started again. A book that makes me think of my father. Question number 4. What popular book have you DNF'd? Well, I DNF'd the audiobook of Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owen, which I had downloaded from my community library. The narrator really irked me, partly because of the way the southern accents were done. To be honest, even when I love the narrators of audiobooks, I often feel less connected to books I listen to rather than read, although I've gotten better at audiobooks during the pandemic for whatever reason. I listened to the first part of Crawdads in January maybe, and after I stopped the audiobook, I just wasn't drawn in enough to request a print copy. I'm playing the audiobook more than the novel for the DNF, and I might try the book again sometime, maybe as a beach read if we ever get to vacation at the beach again. Another book I DNF'd recently, in March of 2020, when things were going to hell in a handbasket and the world was starting to shut down because of the pandemic, Hermione Lee's massive biography of Virginia Woolf, which I was group reading with 2 other great BookTube women for March of the Mammoths. I really will get back to it, but it crossed my reading calendar at a moment when I could barely read anything. Perhaps next March I'll try again. I'm really intrigued by the 5th prompt. What book do you wish you had DNF'd? I kind of wish I had DNF'd Edith Wharton's book, Ethan Frome. But actually, it's probably a good thing I finished it. Long story. I first read it when I was 17, the night before an enormously important college scholarship interview. My mother's collection of classic novels lived on the top shelves of the built-in bookcases along one wall of my childhood bedroom. And as I got older and taller, I used to pull various volumes down whenever I needed something to read. That night, I thought a slim book would be perfect to keep me calm and distracted. I started reading and absolutely hated it. Hated the characters and their closed-off, weak meanness to each other. Well, the next day I sat in the scholarship interview with 5 or 6 interviewers asking me all sorts of questions. One of the first, "What's the best book you've read recently?" I immediately launched into a rant about how I had just read the worst book I'd ever read the night before and why I hated it. When I finished, I felt like an idiot and stumbled around trying to emerge from the world of the book I had just spent 20 minutes reliving and shift to some book I loved. Why didn't I just talk about Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice or maybe Antigone? Well, of course, now I realize that a rant about how much I hated a particular classic book and why actually showed that I was in fact a serious reader. I got the scholarship. Still, the reason I kind of wish I threw Ethan Frome against the wall back then is because my hatred of it was so visceral that it took me almost 3 decades to read any other Edith Wharton books. Now, I absolutely love The House of Mirth, especially, An Age of Innocence, and Custom of the Country, but I still haven't tried Ethan Frome again. I just can't bring myself to do it when there are so many amazing books still to be read surrounding it on my shelves. Question 6. Do you ever reattempt a book you've DNF'd previously, and has it ever been successful for you? I'm kind of blanking here. I'm sure I must have, and I probably have recently. One answer that's a bit strange is that several years ago I started listening to an audiobook of a Thomas Hardy novel, read by the crush-worthy actor who played Inspector Lindley with his calm and gentle voice. I started listening one night as my spouse and I turned out the lights when I was too stressed out to even think about going to sleep. By the end of the first paragraph, I think, I was totally knocked out. I tried again the next night, and the same thing happened. That sounds like Hardy must be awfully boring, but actually, that felt like a wonderful tool. I guess it means it really wasn't a DNF, huh? Anyway, a few years later, I picked up for the first time a Thomas Hardy novel in print during the daylight hours, and I was so engrossed by it that I read a whole slew of Hardy books back to back for hours and hours in a row. I loved the books, and Hardy skyrocketed to the highest tier of favorite authors. But I have to admit, I miss that magic tool that could put me to sleep so quickly. If I try a Thomas Hardy audiobook now, I just get immediately sucked into the book instead. The next question is, what do you do with the book if you DNF it? Well, probably I'd just return it to the community library. If I DNF'd a book I owned and DNF'd it because I couldn't imagine I would ever respond to it in a positive way, I'd probably dump it in a little free library as far from my house as I could walk. If the book were truly horrendous, I might accidentally leave it in the compost pile and hope it would decompose and regenerate into zucchini or something. Prompt number 8. Do you choose more or less risky titles because of your stance on DNFs? Actually, I think my typical DNF style may be a result of my tendency not to choose really risky titles, not the other way around. I choose books I think I'm going to like because I'm a relatively slow reader, at least compared to a lot of booktubers. For example, unlike Steve Donoghue, I need a lot of sleep. I have family responsibilities and other commitments, and at least sometimes I put on clean pants. A comment which probably sounds awfully strange if you don't watch Steve Donoghue. And all of these limit my reading time. So I'm picky about what I commit to read, and therefore I almost always love, or at least really enjoy, what I read. And I'm very rarely led to DNF something. Finally, I want to tag a few folks with terrific channels. First, let me say that I'm horribly behind on BookTube at this point, and I hope y'all haven't done this tag yet, and I have it sitting on my watch later file, which I recognize is a possibility. Claudia from Spinster's Library, Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, Alex at WhatPageAreYouOn, Catherine from Taking Tea with Catherine, Cathie Grimm, and Doris at HannahsBooks. I'm looking forward to seeing all of your answers. Thanks, Steve and Roz, for tagging me. And thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.